Geneva. 9. 0. 3. A.M. The room gleamed with polished marble floors and stage lights bouncing off every surface. Cameras perched like silent hawks, capturing every twitch, every glance. The Global Leadership Equity Forum had just begun streaming live to over 50 countries. World leaders, scholars, activists, billionaires, all seated on a single stage, shoulder to shoulder. The topic, global aid and Africa's path forward. The mood, formal, cautious, charged. Then came the moment no one expected. AOC leaned forward, her elbow casually resting on the table, a smirk tugging at the edge of her lips. She adjusted her mic like she was about to deliver a punchline. And she did. I mean, no offense. She began, voice sweet with sarcasm. But Captain Traoré's ideas sound more like a fairy tale than foreign policy. Is this a leadership panel or open mic comedy night? The room stopped breathing. There was a beat then, a couple nervous chuckles. And then, laughter. Sharp, loud, almost theatrical. The camera cut immediately to Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't move. No blink. No twitch. No defense. He just stared forward calm. Silent. Composed. But there was something behind his stillness. Something powerful. Something ancient. He clasped his hands. His shoulders didn't flinch. His face didn't shift. And yet, the laughter began to die, not because anyone told them to stop, but because they realized they were laughing alone. The moderator looked uneasy, almost like he wanted to intervene, but didn't dare. A soft hush spread through the crowd like fog creeping across a lake. Still. Traoré said nothing. The silence lasted maybe a minute, but it felt like 10. Then, without saying a word, he slowly turned his gaze toward the press section, toward a young boy no more than 12, wearing a jacket too big for him, clutching a notebook like it was made of gold. On the cover, written in thick blue ink, Captain Traoré is my hero. And in that single, silent moment, something cracked. Not in Traoré, not in the boy, but in the room. Because suddenly, it wasn't a joke anymore. It was the beginning of something no one saw coming. The laughter echoed too long. It bounced off marble walls, through earpieces, out into homes around the world. AOC had leaned back, pleased with her quip. While a few on stage smiled politely, some even chuckled along. But something was wrong. Because Captain Traoré still hadn't said a word. The camera stayed locked on him. He wasn't blinking, wasn't shifting, wasn't smiling. He just sat there straight-backed, eyes locked forward, hands calmly folded. He didn't scowl, didn't frown, didn't crack. And somehow, that silence hit harder than any comeback ever could. At first, the audience didn't know what to do. Should they keep laughing? Should they clap? The moderator looked frozen in place, lips slightly parted, unsure if he should move on or apologize. Then the silence began to spread. A strange, dense quiet fell over the room, not the awkward kind, but the heavy kind, the kind that lands on your chest and makes you sit straighter without knowing why. Traoré didn't demand attention. He didn't need to, because everyone in that room, and every viewer behind a screen, suddenly felt it. This wasn't a man trying to impress. This was a man carrying something far bigger than himself. AOC shifted in her seat. Just a little. Just enough to notice her smile was gone. Her hands moved toward her notes. But she didn't read anything. She looked up and met his eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't hurt. They were ancient, wounded, steady, and impossibly full. Behind him, the screen still showed the forum's title, Global Leadership Equity. The irony hung like a shadow over the stage. And just when it seemed like the moment would pass, Captain Traoré leaned forward. His hands moved slowly. He pressed the mic button once softly, deliberately. But he didn't speak yet. Instead, he looked not at the panel, not at the moderator, but back to that boy. The one in the oversized suit, the one still clutching his notebook like a lifeline. Traoré's eyes met the boy's, and in that second, without a single word spoken, the laughter officially died. Respect walked in, and the world started listening. He didn't say a word. Not yet. Captain Traoré's eyes stayed fixed on that boy. The child didn't even flinch, though he looked far too young to be sitting among reporters. Maybe 12. Thin. Serious. His dark jacket swallowed his frame. Sleeve dangling past his wrists. His shoes didn't match. But in his lap sat a weathered notebook. The camera slowly panned in. 3 words were scrawled in shaky blue ink across the cover. Captain Traoré is my hero. That was the moment. Something snapped, not in anger, but in clarity, in sorrow. Because while the world laughed, that boy had looked up to the stage and seen his future being mocked. And Captain Traoré, he saw it too. He inhaled softly. Then, with quiet precision, he stood. The room didn't move. The cameras didn't cut away. You could hear the soft scrape of his chair against the polished floor. He didn't rush. He adjusted his collar. He leveled his shoulders. And he looked at no one, but everyone. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Not make. Not broken. Just real. When you laugh at a soldier, he began, who's buried friends. When you laugh at someone who's watched mothers dig graves for sons they couldn't feed. He paused, letting the silence grow again. You're not mocking me. You're mocking every forgotten voice we fight for. The air thickened. No one blinked. Even the tech crew backstage had stopped moving. I didn't come here for applause. He continued, voice unwavering. I didn't come to entertain. I came because there are people, children, who pray every night that someone, somewhere, will finally listen. The camera cut back to the boy. He was holding his notebook tighter now. Lips pressed. Eyes wet. I saw young men die defending their land. Traoré said, I've watched grandmothers cook leaves when there was nothing left. Then he turned. Not to the audience. To AOC. But his gaze held no venom. Only heartbreak. Disappointment. A silence that scolded deeper than words ever could. So if my words sound like a fairy tale, he said softly, maybe it's because no one ever told you the reality we wake up to. And just like that, the laughing world went quiet. His voice didn't boom. It didn't bark. It barely broke the silence. But somehow, it landed harder than any thunderclap. When you mock a soldier who's buried his friends, his eyes scanned the room. Not accusing, but steady. Who's seen mothers dig graves for sons they couldn't feed? He paused. Not for drama. For memory. You don't insult me. You insult every voice we fight for. Every child still waiting to be heard. The room dead still. The laughter from earlier now felt shameful, embarrassing. Even the moderator shifted in his seat, eyes dropping slightly, as if the floor had become more honest than the panel itself. Captain Traoré stood tall, but not puffed up. Not posturing. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was remembering. And the audience felt it. I did not come here for applause. He continued. His voice still calm, still unshaken. I did not come to charm you. The camera cut to the boy again. He was now wiping his cheek with his sleeve. Not because of sadness, because someone finally said what needed saying. I've watched young men die, defending dirt no one else cared about. I've seen grandmothers boil leaves when the rice ran out. And in those moments, no one laughed. AOC. They prayed. Another pause. AOC looked down. No witty retort. Just stillness. Captain Traoré turned slightly toward her. Not with anger, but with something far heavier disappointment. So if my voice sounds like a fairy tale to you, he took a deep breath. Maybe it's because no one ever told you the reality we wake up to. The silence deepened. Reporters weren't typing. Cameras didn't dare pan away. Even the staff in the wings had stopped moving. It wasn't a clapback. It was a reckoning. And from that moment forward, no one in that room would ever hear his name the same way again. Because what they thought was a soldier had just become something much, much more. He stood still for a moment, letting the silence carry weight. Then, without warning, Captain Traoré's voice softened, not to retreat, but to reach further. You laugh in suits, he said, his tone like gravel wrapped in silk. But I once walked for hours to carry the body of a 5-year-old girl who died holding an empty bowl. A gasp rippled through the audience. One woman near the back bit her lip to keep from crying. Another clutched her chest. She was 5. Her name was AWA. Her village hadn't seen clean water in 2 years. Her father sold his last goat for medicine, but it came too late. He looked down for the first time. Just briefly, as if the memory still burned, still bruised. I wrapped her in my own jacket. He continued, carried her through the night. And when I buried her the next morning, I whispered something I've carried ever since. Never again will their pain be invisible. The words didn't echo. They sank into stone-faced diplomats, into tight-lipped analysts, into viewers at home who suddenly weren't thinking about politics anymore. They were thinking about AWA. And yet here we are, he said, eyes rising again. In a room of leaders, mocking a future some children would give anything just to reach. AOC looked stunned. Not angry. Just cracked. The words she had spoken earlier now sounded small, hollow, far away. Captain Traoré turned to her. But his gaze wasn't sharp. It was tired, heavy, real. So if my ideas sound like fantasy, maybe it's because no one ever bothered to listen to what reality sounds like. When a child cries for help, and the world doesn't answer. He stepped back slightly. And in that moment, even the cameras seemed unsure whether to zoom in or zoom out. Because what had just unfolded wasn't a speech. It was a funeral. Not for AWA, but for the comfort of pretending her story didn't exist. And now that it had been told, no one in the room would ever unhear it. The room was silent, so silent it almost hurt. Captain Traoré stepped back from the microphone, letting his words hang in the air like smoke after a fire. No one moved. Not the moderators. Not the diplomats. Not even AOC. Then, quietly, something shifted. In the second row of the press section, the boy, yes, the same boy with the oversized jacket and the trembling hands stood up. No one told him to. No one expected him to. He simply rose. Security stirred. A few attendees turned. But he didn't walk. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood. Still. Brave. Then, in a voice barely loud enough to carry through the mic hanging above the press seats, he spoke. I walked barefoot to the airport. He said, eyes locked on Captain Traoré. Because my village wanted me to see you. Gasps. Audible ones. People turned to look not out of curiosity, but reverence. My uncle died fighting beside you. The boy continued. We still don't have lights in our village. But today, the whole town is watching. All of us. On one small screen. A single tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. They said. If the world mocks you, he said softly, they mock us too. It was quiet devastation. Not in rage, but in truth. People in the crowd, seasoned journalists, world leaders, academics were now blinking away tears. Not out of sympathy, but because something inside them cracked open. The boy lowered his gaze and stepped back. Not asking for applause. Not looking for attention. Captain Traoré didn't move. His face didn't change. But in his eyes, something shifted. Pride, pain, purpose, and AOC. She couldn't speak. Couldn't look away. Couldn't hide behind notes or microphones or pre-written lines. Because this wasn't a debate anymore. This was a reckoning. A truth too small for headlines, but too heavy to ignore. Captain Traoré stepped forward again, but before he could speak, the room had already changed. And somewhere across the world, thousands of children were watching and finally felt seen. Captain Traoré didn't speak right away. He looked at the boy who had just sat back down, still clutching his notebook. Eyes red but steady. And then turned his gaze toward the audience. His voice, when it came, was even softer than before. His name was Idrissa. The room stilled again. He was 11. Same age. Maybe younger than the boy who just stood. We were evacuating a village during an attack. It was chaos fire. Smoke. Screaming. He paused. His hand resting gently on the podium. Idrissa was carrying his little sister. Not running for himself, running for her. People leaned in. The room was frozen in collective breath. We tried to get them out. But then he swallowed. Not dramatically, but as if forcing pain back into place. He was shot. Right in front of me. Still holding her. A single cry escaped from someone in the crowd. No one turned to look. I caught him before he fell. He looked at me bleeding. Scared and said, Captain, please, don't let them forget me. The silence now was sacred. Not one cough. Not one camera click. Just grief. Tightening its grip. No media came. No headlines followed. No one lit candles for him. He didn't trend on Twitter. He just vanished. Captain Traoré looked out into the sea of faces, many now looking down. Ashamed of what they'd once found amusing. So today, he said firmly, when someone calls me a joke, when they laugh at our pain or mock our vision, I remember Idrissa, and I speak for every child whose story never made it to your screens. A woman in the crowd began crying openly. The boy with the notebook now had tears rolling freely down his cheeks. And if it takes being mocked, if it takes being dismissed, just to make sure you hear their names, he stared directly into the camera now. Then mock me louder. No anger. No bitterness. Just conviction. The kind that turns a soldier into a symbol. And a forgotten boy. Into something the world could no longer ignore. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of stories. Of ghosts. Of children like Idrissa, who had names but no headlines. Captain Traoré let it linger. Then stepped forward once more. His voice did not rise. It deepened. You see this uniform? He asked quietly, brushing a hand across his shoulder. It's not for decoration. He paused, eyes searching the front row, where AOC now sat still, her hands frozen above her papers. This cloth carries names. Friends I lost in ambushes. Children who died in my arms. A kid gasp. A hand covering a mouth. Someone in the back sobbed into their sleeve. Once, he said, we entered a village school after an attack. The classroom had been turned into a graveyard. Children were shot. While still holding notebooks, he looked down. One notebook still had that day's date written on it. That was when the silence cracked. Not with words, but with a shift. A slow, almost imperceptible ripple. The audience was no longer simply listening. They were mourning. I don't wear this to look powerful. He continued, voice tight but steady. I wear it because I promised them I would speak where they could not. AOC's head dropped slightly. Her pen rolled off the table. She didn't reach for it. And then, from across the panel, a man in a gray suit, a French economist, removed his headset. He stood up. No words. No gestures. He simply walked off the stage, leaving his chair empty. The cameras caught it. A single empty seat. A symbol. A silence louder than noise. Captain Traoré turned, slowly, toward the crowd. So ask yourselves, he said, if their lives were so easy to ignore, why is their truth so hard to hear now? Eyes glistened, breaths held. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was something deeper. A reckoning wrapped in restraint. And for the first time that morning, no one saw a soldier. They saw a mirror. And the reflection wasn't comfortable. Captain Traoré's words still hung in the air when a quiet voice broke through the silence. Captain, it came from the very back of the room. A woman had stood older, small-framed, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched something in her fingers. A laminated photo. Her voice wavered but didn't falter. My daughter died in Burkina Faso. She was an aid worker. She believed in your people. A shift moved through the crowd like a pulse. Heads turned. Cameras adjusted. The room leaned in. Captain Traoré turned slowly. His face softened not with pity, but with something deeper. What was her name? He asked gently. The woman's voice cracked. Anna. She whispered. She said you once carried her to safety. During an ambush. For a moment, time froze. Traoré placed a hand over his heart. Yes, he said. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Anna shielded 3 children with her body. I remember her. He never forgot. The woman gasped and collapsed into her chair. Sobbing. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just years of grief suddenly made visible. Captain Traoré walked toward her, not like a leader, not like a soldier, but like a man who'd buried too many names. He stood before her and bowed, deeply, fully, not in ceremony, in mourning. Anna was braver than many men I've served beside, he said, his voice shaking now. She was light in our darkest night. AOC's eyes were glassy now. No smirk, no mask. Just the slow erosion of certainty as truth replaced performance. Across the room, people lowered their heads. Some held hands. Others reached for tissues. Not as politicians or reporters, but as people. For the first time since the forum began. It wasn't about nations or policies or strategies. It was about loss, about memory, about a mother who still carried her daughter's picture, and a man who still carried her name. Captain Traoré turned back to the microphone, and the weight in his eyes told everyone. The real stories, the ones that never make the headlines, were the ones the world needed most. The room was already raw. And just when it felt like hearts couldn't take more, Captain Traoré reached into his pocket. Not dramatically, not with flourish, just quietly, like a man retrieving something sacred. What he pulled out was a piece of paper creased, faded, soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. He looked at it for a second. His lips pressed together. Then, without looking up, he spoke. This is a letter I carry everywhere. It was written by a girl named Aminata. He paused. The paper trembled slightly in his hand, not from nerves, but from reverence. She was 14. She lived in a refugee camp near the northern border. She gave me this letter the last time I visited. He unfolded it slowly, smoothing the lines. She wrote, Captain, if you ever speak to the world, please tell them I'm not lazy. I'm just hungry. A few gasps. A hand covered a mouth. I want to learn, but our school was bombed. I want to run, but my legs hurt from walking for water every day. Traoré stopped. Silence fell, not polite, not respectful, stunned. She died 2 weeks later. He said, eyes still on the page. No cameras came. No articles were written. She didn't get a funeral with flowers or speeches. He folded the letter again slowly, gently, as if tucking her voice back into his chest. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for pity. She asked for dignity. He looked up now, and every face in the room met his. So when someone laughs at our hope or dismisses our efforts as fantasy, I remember Aminata. He placed the letter back into his pocket with care, and I hear her voice whispering, don't let them forget me. People in the audience were crying freely now, not performatively, but painfully, truthfully, and even those who came expecting sound bites now sat in the presence of something they could not explain. AOC looked at him, not with resistance, but with recognition, because this wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a resurrection of the unheard. For the first time since her remark, AOC reached for her microphone, but she didn't speak. Her fingers trembled slightly. She looked at Captain Traoré, then slowly lowered the mic back to the table, and did something no one expected. She stood. No drama. No apology speech. She simply bowed her head, not in defeat, but in respect. It wasn't loud. It wasn't for the cameras. It was honest. The room held its breath. Then from the same row in the press section, the boy, the one with the notebook, The voice. The village behind him raised his hand once more. This time, he didn't wait to be called. He stepped forward. Eyes glistening. Voice cracking. If the world finally respects us, he asked, will you protect us too? It wasn't a political question. It was a child asking for a promise. Captain Traoré turned. Slowly. And for the first time, a small smile touched his lips. Not of pride. Not of victory. Of purpose. That is why I'm here. He said. Not to be right. Not to be famous. But to fight with words, so no child ever has to beg for dignity again. The audience didn't clap at first. They stood. Quietly. One by one. A ripple across leaders. Critics. Strangers. Rivals now united not by opinion, but by understanding. A journalist in the media booth whispered into her mic. We came here, expecting politics. We're witnessing something historic. Outside. Across the world. People had stopped scrolling. In refugee camps. On cracked screens in crowded rooms. In silent bedrooms lit only by phones, people cried. Because this wasn't about Africa anymore. It was about humanity finally hearing itself. And then the boy spoke once more, this time not asking, but declaring, Captain, you made us proud. Traoré raised a fist, quiet, steady in salute, and walked off stage without another word. But the world, it never stopped talking, because the man they once mocked had just reminded them what it means to listen.